Good afternoon and welcome to our second webinar on the MBA entrance exam preparation series. Firstly, apologies for the delayed start because of certain technical issues. So, the topic for today is the top 10 topics to prepare for CAT 2016. Well, you can see some of these topics on your screen, but before I actually share these, let me first give you a disclaimer. When we say these are the top 10 topics or the top 5 topics or this is a must do topic, remember that this is never written in stone because CAT or any entrance exam for that matter never has a syllabus. If you start thinking that we have a syllabus and we need to prepare as per that, then you start assigning weightage to those topics and accordingly it hampers your preparation. So before I go to these topics, let's first have a very short poll and see what you find most difficult in all these topics. So I will give you a question. There are five options in that question. You can fill in. Of course, there is always uh, something called others where you don't find these topics difficult. So I'll give you this question and let's see what the answers of everybody are. So you can start filling in your answers. As I've said, I've given you five topics. Which of these areas do you find most difficult? RC, numbers, geometry, DI, and puzzles. Okay, so nearly 90% of our audience here has voted, and overwhelmingly, the most difficult area here has been found to be RC. Approximate. Let me share the result of the poll with you. Yeah. So as you can see, nearly 40% of our audience feels that reading comprehension is difficult. What do we do in that case? Because apart from that, if you see, it's approximately equally spread between geometry, DI, and puzzles. But RC, difficult, well, that's a trouble area. Why do I say that? Let me now come to the topics that are most difficult, and you will realize why I have called it a trouble area. As you know, there are three sections in CAT. We have verbal ability, quantitative aptitude, and DILR. Verbal ability is 34 questions, DILR is 32, and maths is another 34. How is the verbal ability section split? As you all know, there are 24 questions out of 34 from the RC area, and the remaining 10 are from a range of various topics and asked in the numerical entry format. This generally, when I say that CAT doesn't have a syllabus or a format, this is the only area where this does not apply. What this means is that since last year, CAT has started giving us a standard paper in terms of the verbal ability section where the first 24 questions in the test are directly from RC. As you can see here, and I'll just point it out as well, as you can see, you will have 4 to 5 sets which are multiple choice types. When we have 24 sets, last year the pattern was that there were 3 RCs of 6 questions each, which is 18 questions, and 2 RCs of 3 questions each, which is another 6 questions. So there were 5 RC sets in all. However, it does not mean that you will always get 5 RC sets. For example, you can also get 4 RCs itself of 6 questions each, or you can get 2 RCs of 6 and 4 RCs of 3, and so on. So there might be various permutations and combinations available. However, what exactly is the nature of the RCs in CAT? As you can read here, the RCs in CAT do not test your vocabulary. They test your reading and analytical skills. What do we mean by reading and analytical skills? You will probably never get a direct question in a CAT RC. You will have to read the RC first, understand the underlying logic behind the RC, the common tone, theme, summary, etc. And then you will need to apply it to answer each question. As a result, as you can see, the questions in each RC are more inferential rather than factual. For instance, let's say there is an RC on Brexit. You will not get a question which is framed like who among these was a supporter of Brexit. Never. What you are more likely to get is which of these was one of the reasons or could have been one of the reasons why so and so person supported the Brexit resolution. Then you need to go to the RC, understand where the logic for supporting the argument is given, study it, and then answer the question. Similarly, you might have another question: which of these statements is the author most likely to agree with or least likely to agree with? So in these kind of questions, you need to look at the whole RC, look at what points the author is trying to make, and based on that, identify, okay, these are the points where the option is in agreement with the author. This is where it is beyond the scope of the RC, and this is where he is not agreeing. Similarly, you will be able to answer all the inferential questions. So how do you practice such RCs? As I have written here, whenever you practice any topic or when you read any topic, say in the newspaper or on the net, try and create a central idea. What is a central idea? A central idea is a 1 line or 2 line description of the RC. So if there is, again going back to the Brexit example, you should be able to write it in 1 line that this passage talks about the advantages and disadvantages of Brexit on the entire global economy. That's, for example, that's the central idea of the RC. A summary is more like a précis that we used to write in school. So if it's a 900 word RC, try and express it in 1/3 of that. Title: for every passage that you read, try and create your own title. Tone is a slightly more technical thing, but just to explain it in short here, it is more like, is the RC factual, is it judgmental, is it very optimistic, is it pessimistic, etc. Then, as I said earlier, arguments for the passage, against the passage, etc. This you should do for every passage that you read while practicing. What are the areas that you should practice? If you go back and look at old CAT papers or even CAT papers up to 2011-12, you will see that CAT was famous for subject areas like philosophy, sociology, English classics, literature, etc. So you would have been expected to get something written by, say, a Dante or some French philosopher somewhere or some English classic. However, over the last 1 or 2 years, CAT has started moving towards more and more contemporary topics, which means areas like current politics, Indian as well as international. If you notice, I've been talking about Brexit all the time. So any Indian versus international topic, or it could be economics, financial matters, business and the corporate world. Then you have environment, climate change, any topic which is relevant in today's scenario and where you need to have an opinion as an informed individual. Hence, it is very important for you to be abreast of what is happening in the world, not only in India, but at a global level as well. Hence, when people say read the newspaper, it's not just about reading editorials. You need to follow up on various articles, see what different people, what are the opinions that different people have on these subjects, try and be informed on those subjects. That might help you more in the RCs. So as I said, this is probably the most important area of the whole paper, because you know that straight away approximately more than 70% of a section is going to come from this area. Now coming to the remaining 10 questions in verbal. Typically we've seen last year, and based on the experience of various slots, there are 4 or 5 chapters from which questions are asked here. So I'll list them down in general order of importance. These chapters are jumbled sentences, paragraph completion, paragraph summary, sentence correction, which means you need to identify the correct or the incorrect sentence, and word usage, where you need to know whether the word has been correctly used or not, or which of these 5 usages of the word is correct, etc. These are typically the areas where you can get questions from. Let me move to the most important one of these, jumbled sentences. As I have written here, you can expect anywhere between 3 to 5 questions from this area. They will all be numerical entry questions. Now you might wonder, what is a numerical entry question in jumbled? As you know, when you look at a jumbled sentence question, you have 5 options, and you're supposed to arrange the 5 sentences in a sequence: A, D, B, C, E, E, B, D, C, A, etc. So your options have these sequences. Hence it becomes very easy for you to start eliminating. For instance, if you identify that statement E should start my passage, then you just look at those options and start formulating the sequence. What if I were to tell you that you no longer have any options? You have 5 sentences, arrange them. Which means now your concepts of jumbled, your understanding of the English language, how certain sentences follow each other become very important. That is where your reading skills that you develop while practicing RCs also come into the picture. Currently, I would say, because of the structure, jumbled sentences is probably the most difficult part of this entire verbal section, because there are no options. So when you come up with a sequence, say 3, 2, 4, 5, 1, you should be confident that this is the right sequence. I enter it in the box. But the good part is that no numerical entry question has negative marks, which means even if you get it wrong, you don't lose anything. At most you get 0. A typical variant in CAT over the last 2 to 3 years, I think it started in 2013 or 14, but there is something called contextual odd man out in the CAT exam. Now what exactly is this? Typically what happens is, you are given 4 or 5 sentences, and the question will say that one of these sentences does not fit the pattern. So here you are supposed to do 2 things. One, you identify what is the correct order of the sentences, A, B, C, D, E, and then you decide out of this A, B, C, D, E, which one of them is not fitting the overall sequence within this pattern. So it's an odd man out meets jumbled sentences question. Again, extremely difficult, also because there are no options. But good part is no negative mark because there is numerical entry. So you should definitely attempt these questions. The next most important topic in verbal is a combination of 2 chapters, paragraph completion and paragraph summary. At most you can expect 1 or 2 questions each from this area, which is a maximum of 3 questions, max to max 4 questions. The difference between the two is, in a paragraph completion question, you will be given one short paragraph of 3 to 4 lines, and there will be 1 sentence each in the options that you will need to select. So one of them will be the perfect completion for this passage. So you need to look at what the paragraph is stating, what is its tone, what is its theme, etc. and then decide which will be the right sentence that will conclude this paragraph. While you are practicing them, you ideally should practice them as if you are solving an MCQ. Why am I saying that? The way it is typically given in the exam is that you have the passage, you have the 5 options, and you need to decide, okay, let's say option 3 is the correct answer. So you just need to enter 3 in the box, which is like saying actual exam में आप जाके 3 वाले बटन पे क्लिक करो उसके बदले यहाँ पे कह दिया कि ऑप्शन 3 जो नंबर है वो आप बॉक्स में लिख दो. So it's just a different way of entering the data. That's it. Very similarly, you have a paragraph summary where there is a 2 or 3 passage paragraph और 2 or 3 paragraphs का एक छोटा passage होता है. Based on that, you need to identify the summary of the passage. Generally, in a paragraph summary, you need to take care of couple of things. Your summary ideally should not have examples. Your summary should not come up with a point that is not given in the passage. Your summary should not expand beyond the scope of the passage. So we'll discuss this in a different webinar later where we come to specific topics. But in general, these are some of the tools that you can use to eliminate options in paragraph summary. Paragraph summary is something where you should ideally try to solve it using options. For two reasons, these two are must solve questions. One, because there are numerical entry, and two, because they are slightly easier than jumbled sentences. So in jumbled, it might so happen that you might just have to randomly mark some answer, whereas in paragraph completion and summary, you will be very easily able to answer all your questions if you try to solve them properly. So this covers the first section in terms of verbal. I will take questions from you on verbal ability and the other sections sometime later. Let me now move to the next section. But before that, let me ask you what kind of RC passages you are most comfortable. So I will give you another poll. Let's see what are your favorite topics, and then I'll be able to guide you as to what you should study more. So I've shared 5 topics with you. Okay. So let me now share the poll results with you. As you can see, nearly 40% of our audience is saying that current affairs and politics is what they like to read. Approximately the same amount, 42%, prefers environment, climate change, science and technology. So this is a very good thing that I'm seeing, because as I just said, these are the topics that you definitely need to prepare. However, what I am worried about is that not even 10% of our audience is really interested in topics on finance and business. Guys, as I said, of course, there's no syllabus, there's no guarantee, but if you're preparing for CAT, corporate affairs, finance, economics, business, these are things that you cannot ignore. If I were to talk to you guys, let's say 15 days from now, I wouldn't want to see 9% as a preferred choice for you guys. I would say you should try and read up more on these topics, because otherwise it will appear very technical and very difficult in the exam. So this is not really to point out mistakes or faults in your preparation. This is just to say that, look, these are the 4 topics that you definitely need to go on. Philosophy and arts, probably 10%, fair enough. As I said, not very important nowadays, but you can never neglect it. Now let me move on to the next subject area, which is maths. Again, there are 34 questions in this section. Unlike the verbal section, there are 2 big differences here. In verbal, the number of MCQs and numerical entry questions is fixed, 24 plus 10. In maths, this number is not fixed. Last year, we have had reports of people having anywhere between 12 to 15 numerical entry questions, which means that the number of standard MCQs will be anywhere from 19 to approximately 23. However, the good part, and this is especially for non-engineers, guys, you need to stop worrying because last year this was the easiest section of the entire exam. Please keep this in mind. Since the last 2 or 3 years, the CAT authorities have made a clear-cut stand that they want more and more non-engineers to start clearing CAT and come into the IIMs or other top colleges. Somewhere this has reflected in the quality of the maths section in the exam. When I say quality, I don't mean that the questions are bad, but you will not face Olympiad level questions too much. You will face simpler questions which test your basic concepts. Okay, when I say simple, understand this, you won't probably have a question where they say a train crosses a bridge 300-meter long in so many seconds. What is the length of the train? No, that is what you'll probably find in a CMAT or a SNAP. Here there will be some concept involving trains, but it might require your understanding. If I ask you a question where I just said the train crosses the bridge 300-meter long in 30 seconds, what is the speed of the train or so on, that kind of a question will definitely be asked as a numerical entry question. When I took CAT last year, or when our students took CAT last year, that was the feedback that the 12 to 13 numerical entry questions that were asked were mostly very simple conceptually. But because you didn't have any option, you had to be very confident that what I have done, the formula that I have applied, the concept that I have used, I am very sure about it. The three areas that you definitely need to look out for in the quant section are what I have just written here. I have of course tried to make them slightly larger rather than focusing on individual chapters. But the first one is definitely just one chapter, which is numbers. Everybody who has ever prepared for CAT in the last 10 years or 15 years will tell you that numbers is important. This is because it involves a lot of sub-concepts such as divisibility, remainders, powers, squares, square roots, plus it has formulae and properties for each of those things. So you take an a raised to n plus or minus b raised to n, or you take the remainder theorem, you take cyclicity, you take powers, you have formula for each of them. The more important part is that each of those formulae has applicability. You should know when you can use the remainder theorem, when you can use a raised to n minus b raised to n, etc. That is one thing. The second thing is lot of questions on numbers. I'll give you a list of certain topics: numbers, functions, sequences, and series. These are 2 or 3 topics, and I would say algebraic formulae. These are 2 or 3 topics where you can very often solve a question faster by using answer option elimination, using what is called induction, where you take the first term, then take the second term, then take the third term, try and get a pattern, or you substitute suitable value from the options in the function or in the expression and get the answer. Sometimes you take a simple value. If you get there are 3 integers satisfying so and so condition, you take all 3 as 1, try and solve the question and see which condition satisfies. So there, solving it conventionally will not help. Questions on numbers, functions, sets, sequences, series, etc. are solved much faster and in a better manner if you focus on stuff like option elimination, value substitution, etc. So here solving 500 questions doesn't help. Here you need to solve each question, look at your solution, look at the official solution given, and see how you can make your answer better. That is the best possible way to try and solve questions on numbers. As I have written here, every question may need a new approach. So you need to know the formulae, but just knowing the formulas by heart will not help here. The same logic also applies for the next topic, which is geometry. Now, geometry, when I say geometry here, it is actually a combination of 6 to 7 chapters. I have listed a few, but I'll list all of them here. You have concepts on circles, then you have polygons, which starts with triangles, then quadrilaterals, then you have coordinate geometry, trigonometry, and mensuration. Generally in CAT, we haven't seen too many questions on trigonometry. There is always the occasional question on mensuration. But the first three things that I've written here, circles, triangles, and quadrilaterals, are definitely important. You, if you think that numbers has a lot of formulae, you will go mad when you see the number of formulae in circles, triangles, and quadrilaterals. Everything is a new formulae, new theorem, but you need to know where it will be applied. One of the ways to solve these questions faster is to try and work backwards. When I say work backwards, what it means is that if the question says find the value of this angle, try and identify, okay, for this angle, what is the formula that applies? For that formula, what is the data needed? Let's say you need to find the value of a certain angle. Then you know that you can use the sine rule. In the sine rule, you need the value of the three sides and the three angles. What do I have that data? If not, can I use cosine rule? Can I use area of triangle, etc.? So you need to know all the various formulae that apply in that case, identify which one is the most important or most applicable, and then work backwards from there. But geometry is definitely a scoring area, and you can get a lot of marks out of it if you do it properly. The last topic that I've mentioned is arithmetic rather than modern math or functions, simply because arithmetic is more of a conceptual area that is important for quant as well as DI. So when you want to solve the rest of maths, you cannot solve maths without having strong fundamentals in arithmetic. When I say strong fundamentals in arithmetic, I mean areas such as averages. Now, you might say why averages? But in the one very important formula is, for example, for positive numbers, am greater than gm greater than hm. Now, unless you know what is arithmetic mean, geometric mean, harmonic mean, how do you solve it? Or you should know percentages, helps in DI. You should know ratio proportion, helps everywhere. Ratio proportion by itself helps you in mixtures and allegations, profit and loss, variation, time and work, time and distance, etc. So these 2 or 3 chapters here are the stepping stones to solve maths nicely everywhere. These 3 areas, I would recommend that you practice them well enough. For every question that you solve, you should try and understand the solution, understand the best possible way you can solve the question, master it, and then you will be able to see your math score going up. Let me now move on to the last section, which has only 32 questions, but sorry, I shared the poll again by mistake, but let me move on to the last section, which has 32 questions, but this can be considered as a combination of 2 sections in CAT. If you are taking CAT for the first time, then let me tell you, last year what CAT had was there were 16 questions on DI, which is 4 sets, and there were 16 questions on LR, which is again 4 sets. So that part was fixed. On the tab, there were 2 subsections given, DI and LR. They were separated. So there was no case where the DI and LR questions were mixed. The first 16 were DI, the last 16 were LR. Point number 1 that I have written here is tables and graphs, which is basically DI. Last year and last to last year, CAT has started going back to the old DI pattern of CAT. When I say old DI pattern, whenever you go and talk to your faculty, wherever you're studying, or to any senior, they will tell you that CAT had a very distinct flavor of DILR up to 2008. I myself am a 2003 CAT aspirant. So when we used to take CAT, the DI at that time used to be very logic oriented, which means that you had to understand the whole set. It wasn't calculation intensive. You had to understand the set. You had to see what the question is. You had to see what the data is. Half the time we would never understand कि इस पूरे टेबल में एक्चुअली डेटा दिया क्या है. अगर आप वो समझ जाओ तो बाकी के क्वेश्चंस बहुत आसान होते थे. तो Since the last 2 years, that is what CAT is going back to. It is more of logical based DI rather than anything else. I would say if you want to practice along with your mocks, just pick up a copy of CAT 2005 to 2008 or CAT 2003 to 2008, and you'll have around 7 to 8 CAT papers with you. Try and solve the DI there, you'll get a very good idea of what I'm saying. What are the areas that are covered in CAT? The DI part. You have tables. You typically have tables out here. These tables can be of three types. When I say tables, you can have a complete table, which means that all the data is given in that table and you need to then either calculate. Typically in CAT, you will have the second type, which is incomplete tables, which means that some data is given, some clues are given, and then you need to try and fill the remaining table. One of the favorite areas of CAT is tournament based questions or game based questions. So for instance, you will have a half filled table for a football tournament or an IPL kind of tournament or a tennis tournament, and then there'll be clues, and then you need to identify which team could have won the tournament, or if team X won the next three matches, what would happen, etc. etc. So everything is conditional, everything is based on you understanding what the logic is. The second important one is caselets. A caselet is nothing but a puzzle which is given in a paragraph format. So for instance, instead of giving you a table, you might get an entire paragraph which says there are 10,000 students in a school. The ratio of males is to females is so much. Each student can select one out of four subjects, and there'll be all kinds of clues given. Male selecting English versus female selecting history and so on. You need to solve that entire thing, come up with a table or come up with the outcome of this set and solve the remaining questions. Conceptually, not very difficult, but keep in mind that it is very tedious because there is so much data given that you need to know which data to pick up, which data is connected to each other, and how to answer those questions. The next three are probably one group. You know what these mean: bar graphs, pie charts, line charts. But ideally, you will never get calculation based questions. You will always get LR based questions on these. Typically, what CAT does is there might be a set where you have a bar graph along with a table, and you need to solve both to arrive at all the answers. Last is advanced graphs. What I mean by advanced graphs, and I will give you 2 3 names so you can look up on the net or look up in your mocks and try to practice these. There is something called a donut graph, which is DOUGHNET. A donut graph. There is a radar graph, which is also called a spider chart. There is an XY scatter plot, etc. These are common graphs also in an Excel sheet. If you look at Excel and go to advanced graphs, you will find all of these. There is something called an area plot, again available on Excel. So you should practice reading such graphs. Mainly where people go wrong is they don't know how to read such a graph. So when you're practicing your mocks, also try to know how you should read such graphs. Now, so what do you do in CAT? As I said, I've said this umpteen times in the last 10 minutes. These sets tend to be logical and conceptual. So you need to focus on selecting the right set, which means that if there are 16 questions in 4 sets, you should not try and attempt all 4. You will not be able to do that. Look at solving the best 2 sets or the easiest 2 sets, and you are on the way to clearing the sectional cutoff. Last year I did that. I solved 3 in LR, I solved 2 in DI, and I comfortably cleared the sectional cutoff. So look at solving 2 to 3 sets. Of course, this is not a rule. If your test is easy, you're able to solve all 4, then happily go ahead and solve all 4. Let me now move to the other part of this section, which is LR. But before I go that, let me ask you, what are your favorite areas in LR? So again, I will share a short poll with you. Let's see what are your favorite areas. Okay, so I think most of the votes have come in. So I'll close the poll right now and share the results with you. Yeah, so as you can see, half of our audience, exactly half of our audience says they like arrangements. The guys and girls who do like arrangements are actually on the right track, because out of the two or out of the four sets that you have, there will definitely, I mean, this is based on my experience. Of course, I can't give you a guarantee, but over the last 7 8 years that I've taken cat non-stop, every year I have had 1 to 2 sets on arrangements. It could be people in a single row, it could be creating a schedule of lectures over a week, it could be people in 2 rows, it could, I have, in cat I have rarely seen people in a circle, but generally I have had questions on scheduling of lectures or events. I've had questions on putting people in a line, of course with other parameters given. So maybe their profession is given or some other condition is given and so on. But arrangements is definitely important. Complex grouping is something, when I say complex grouping, what I mean, in case some of you didn't understand the name, what I mean is those matrix kind questions where you have, let's say, 5 people, 5 destinations, 5 cars and 5 partners. That is something that I have had every single year since 2009. I mean, this is a year I can stick my neck out and say practice, practice, practice. You can expect to definitely get one question. Venn diagrams, a lot of you have correctly pointed out as something which is important. I would say yes, it is very important for two reasons. As I have written here, you can expect 0 to 1 sets, but this can be asked. The If you see a very important line that I have written here, is that it can be asked in a tabular, caselet based manner or chart based manner, which means that a question from Venn diagrams can come as a DI question or as an LR question. A question on arrangements will always be in LR. Understand that? So anything that you have in Venn can go in either section. Hence, during practice, this is something that you cannot afford to neglect. You should practice this. You should understand the concepts of this. You should understand set theory very nicely, and then practice DILR. Venn is something you cannot neglect. Lastly, as I said, arrangements 1 to 2 sets. I've written down all the possibilities: circle, rectangular, square, linear, multiple. When I say complex, as I said, the matrix based questions or a combination of the two. The last area which all of you have ignored here, which is 6% of numerical puzzles, is something which is extremely important, because some numerical puzzle or the other is always there in the CAT exam. They are essentially mathematical puzzles. So it might involve some aspects of PNC or sequences and series, or I would say arithmetic, ratio proportion, maybe numbers. There, or as I had explained earlier, tournament based questions, etc. But there is some mathematical logic. You need to understand that logic, solve the question, and get full marks. Like last year, I won't disclose all the details, but I had a question where there was data given that certain people have applied for, have tried to bid in an auction. There is a base price and there is an actual bidding price, and all the clues were given in that format. Base price for A is 3 times the bidding price for B. B has the least bidding price. So you had to create a whole set of linear equations, solve those linear equations, and you would get the entire table. What was the base price for everybody? What was the bidding price for everybody? How many objects did they buy, etc. Once you filled the entire table, all 4 questions were done. So numerical logic is something which is not a pure concept by itself. It's an application based question. But for that, your mathematical skills have to be good. What is the breakup of MCQs and numerical entry in this section? Last year, the typical breakup was 16 questions, which is 4 sets, were MCQs and 4 sets were numerical entry. But there is no guarantee regarding the same. Secondly, my paper had two sets on numerical entry in LR and two in DI. However, there were friends and colleagues who got three in LR, one in DI, or vice versa. So don't go with a preconceived notion that you will get X number of sets which are numerical entry in DI and in LR. Be prepared to get anything. Okay, so as I'll just summarize, the topics that you definitely need to prepare for CAT if you have limited time are RC, jumbled sentences, and para completion plus summary in the verbal ability section, numbers, geometry, and arithmetic for quant, tables along with graphs, Venn diagrams, arrangements, and numerical puzzles for LR. Of course, some of you might think that अगर ये सब हो गया तो और क्या बचा? There are a lot of topics left. You have topics like critical reasoning, function, sets, vocabulary, etc. So much else that is also there to do. I'm not saying that you should neglect those topics. I'll repeat my first line again. There is no syllabus in CAT, which means that apart from preparing these topics well, you should also look at those topics as and when you get time. But this is not something that you can ignore at any point in time. These are the pointers that I wanted to share from my end. What I'll do now is I'll throw the session open for questions. As you can see on your screen, there is a tab called questions. The way we will work on this is you can type in your questions, and as and when I start seeing the questions on the screen, I will speak to you and give my answer. Then, okay, so I've started getting questions. I'll try and answer the questions in sequential order, and then if you have follow-up questions, you can always come up. So some of the earlier questions are numerical puzzles, which I have just answered. Yeah, so somebody has said, what about grammar? Can CAT 2017 throw any surprises? Abhishek, I got your question. So grammar is something where even if you get questions, they will typically be in terms of sentence correction based questions. Which of these is the correct sentence, or which of these is the incorrect sentence? Identify the incorrect part of the sentence. So you'll have 5 parts out of 4 parts which are marked in the sentence, and one of them might be wrong. Or you might be asked to take one sentence and represent it in the most correct manner and concise manner in terms of grammar. So you might have questions in grammar, but that will hardly be 2 or 3 questions. You should, and grammar is something that can be solved mainly by good practice. Okay, Jai Kishan has a question. Please give us some tricks or tips for identifying answers in RC. Okay, Jai, I will answer this question. When you solve RC in CAT, the examiner always puts in options in such a manner that you can eliminate 2 options out of 4 straight away. Now, how does that happen? What they do is that one of the options will have an example which is irrelevant to the topic, or one of the options will expand the scope of the topic and tell you. So if the question says, which of these arguments does the author put forth in supporting his cause? So one of the options will definitely be which weakens the author's argument instead of strengthening it. One of them will strengthen the argument but based on some other logic. Some option will take data which is known externally. So if the topic is, let's say, talking about surgical strikes, then the question will also have some data which is not given in that passage, and you will assume that data because you know about that topic, which is a trap. So you are always supposed to take the data which is given in the passage only. You should not take data from outside. So these are some of the tricks that they use to frame the options. So when you are eliminating the options, look out for such things. Extra examples, going beyond the scope of the passage, or looking at a very narrow aspect of the passage, saying something which is actually opposite to what the question asks, etc. The second thing that you need to do is look at what is the actual solution and what is the rationale given in the solution. Based on that, you will again be able to identify what logic has been used. Once you start practicing, you will start getting the right answer in RCs. Utsav has a question, how many questions to attend in each section for 90 plus percentile? Well, Utsav, I would say, of course, it depends on what the difficulty level is there in your paper, but generally, out of the 5 RC sets that you have, that is out of 24 questions, I would say try and attempt at least 3 properly. Attempt all, so that is somewhere around 15 questions there. 15 to 18 is a good number. In the verbal numerical entry questions, you should attempt all 10, but try and target 6 to 7 correctly. In maths, out of 34, let's assume you have 22 MCQs, then anywhere around 16 to 17 MCQs definite attempt. The numerical entry, I would say attempt all of them because there's no negative marking. In DILR, if you can attempt 20 out of 32, it is a good attempt. But don't keep them as a benchmark. This is for reference. Neha's question is, what should be the strategy if I start now? Is it possible to prepare in these 2 months? Neha, it is definitely possible. You have 2 months in your hand. But yes, I also need to know that whether you have appeared for CAT earlier, is this your first attempt, and how good or bad you are at theory. So what I would suggest is that instead of me giving you a generic answer right now, I will share my email ID anyways at the end of this session. What I would recommend is that you write a mail to us on that email ID giving us your background in terms of whether this is your first attempt, where have your theory preparations reached, etc. And then I'll be able to give you a slightly more customized plan as to what you should do in these next 2 months. Is that fine, Neha? Twinkle has a question. What are the cutoffs for various section? The same question is also asked by Rohit. Twinkle and Rohit, this is something that we cannot say right now. I gave the answer to Utsav a couple of minutes back where I said that this should be your minimum number of attempts. So you can try and target those attempts plus or minus 1 and 2, but don't go with a predetermined notion that these are the number of cutoffs. Also keep in mind, last year the number of slots for CAT was very large, or at least more than this year. So this time there are just 2 slots in one day. So the cutoffs will vary accordingly because the difficulty levels will vary. So if you start focusing on the cutoff part of things, your performance will suffer. Rather, the general strategy that I would recommend is take your best section, try to get as many marks as possible there. In the other 2 sections, or in the section that you're weakest, try and attempt at least 70% of the questions there in a proper systematic manner. Abhishek's question is, how important is coordinate geometry and statistics? Abhishek, in my opinion, statistics not really very important. At the most 1 or 2 questions here and there. Coordinate geometry, yes, you can expect a couple of questions, but you should be clear in your basics. You will get very conceptual, simple questions. You should be able to answer them easily. But again, depends on how good your concepts are. Hemant's question is, are test funda mocks enough for CAT prep? Hemant's, like, actually this is the most difficult question for me to answer because I cannot comment on other institutes. It is unfair from my side and it is not even policy. Our mocks are definitely designed in such a way that if you do them on a standalone basis, then you should be prepared for CAT. However, if you want, you can always practice more mocks because there is no harm in quantity. Yes, what you should keep in mind is that whatever you practice, you need to analyze the test in the best possible manner. Sumit's question is, how do I increase vocabulary for CAT? Sumit, vocabulary is not very important for CAT historically. You will ideally never get questions like what is the synonym or antonym for a so and so word. But in case if you keep reading good articles, you keep reading newspapers, you keep reading good online publications, automatically your reading skills will improve, and that will help you more in CAT rather than anything else. Rishabh has a question: how do I prepare for quant in a limited time? Rishabh, noticing what we have seen in CAT in the last 2 or 3 years is that quant has become more and more conceptual and simple rather than very application based, which means that even at the cost of more practice, you should try and focus more on the theory part of quant and get all your basics in place. Once you do that, you should then focus on solving the question in a smarter manner rather than just practicing more and more questions. These are the two things that you will definitely need to focus on, and then your quant scores will start increasing. Hemant's question is, what is the level of test funda RCs compared to real-time CAT RC? Hemant, as far as possible, we have tried to cover the kind of topics and difficulty level that we've seen in CAT last year. But again, there is no guarantee that the same will come. I can say with confidence that if you take our mocks and the sectionals, the RCs will give you a good enough idea of what to expect in the CAT RC. Navid has a question: what exactly do we have to figure out when it says inferred? Okay, Navid, let me give you a slightly different example here. Let's say I give you a bar graph where the sales figures for 5 people are given for 6 years. Then a direct question would be where I ask you what is the total sales figure for Gaurav, and you just add the data. An indirect question would be, or an inferred question would be, where I probably give you some other data based on which you need to get the breakup of Gaurav's sales figure for each month in terms of different zones, then identify which is the maximum, which is the minimum, and arrive at an answer. So it's an indirect question. Similarly, in an RC, a factual question means you will find the exact data given in the passage. You need to read it and answer the question. This is typically what happens in IIFT or in, say, a SNAP. So, for instance, if there is a passage on MS Dhoni, the untold story, there a factual question might be which of these statements is true, and you might have a statement where it is said that MS Dhoni worked for 2 years as a ticket checker at Kharagpur Junction. That might be direct given in the passage. An inferred statement could be which of these reasons does the author attribute to the mental strength of MS Dhoni, and his options may be that his ability to balance a job and cricket at Kharagpur railway station, or his ability to balance his role as a wicketkeeper and batsman in the team, or whatever, his ability to absorb personal loss and still work for the team, etc. So there will be those kind of options where you need to forget the movie. Understand that you might have seen the movie, you know what is the correct answer as per the movie, but ignore the movie, read what is given in the passage, and then see, अच्छा पैसेज में क्या रीजन बताया जिसके वजह से एमएस धोनी के मेंटल स्ट्रेंथ के बारे में बताया, ये दिया है, ओके खड़गपुर के बारे में बोला है तो खड़गपुर इज माय आंसर. दैट इज हाउ यू कैन figure out what is an inferred question versus what is a factual question. Jay Kishan has another question: how many questions can we expect from logs? Jay Kishan, over the last 3 years, I have always had 1 or 2 questions from logs. I have colleagues who have never got a question from logs in the last 2 years. So you can expect anywhere between 1 to 2 questions. Hemant says he's getting para jumbles wrong with what is accuracy in the theta questions, which is basically the numerical entry questions. Hemant, as I said, para jumbles have become more difficult because there are no options. So there, frankly, you cannot do anything to ensure that it is correct. You have to take each question as a challenge, identify that this is the correct answer, and mark it. There is no way you will be sure that this is the correct answer. Abhishek's question is that his percentile varies between 95 and 99. What should I do now to score 99? Well, Abhishek, if you are already at 95, then I would say conceptually you're in a damn good position. For 99, you will now need to work on two aspects. One, identify the questions where you're going right and see how much time you're taking for the questions and how you are solving. You will identify that some of these questions can be solved in a better manner every time. Secondly, go to those questions where you're going wrong and there try to dissect what are the causes for error. You will always be able to identify at least one or two questions per section where you made silly mistakes. You solved it correctly, you knew the logic, and then you ended up marking something wrongly, or you ended up ignoring some data in the question. Even if you focus on those 4 or 5 silly mistake wala answers in the exam, your percentile will go up by 1 or 2 percentage points. Also identify those areas where you're taking a lot of time to solve questions and still going wrong. That is where probably you're conceptually weak. So that part you might need to revise. Kiran says that his or her strength is arithmetic and algebra except numbers, geometry is weak. Kiran, as I just said over the entire session, these are two areas that you'll definitely need to work. But because both of them are very conceptual, practice is not enough. You will need to work on concepts. Maybe you might need to sit with your friends or your faculty or somebody and understand the concepts again and again. But till the time you don't work on the concepts of this area, you will struggle in maths. I'm sorry if I'm being very straightforward here, but in your best interest, I would say that numbers and geometry is something that you'll definitely need to focus on. Hemant says, I am unable to decode numerical puzzles. Hemant, practice, 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 nothing else. As I said, numerical puzzles is an offshoot of mathematics. So if your quant area is good, numerical puzzles will come to you, but you should be able to understand the data given there and try and express it in a tabular or equation based manner. So the more you practice here, the better it will become. Utsav wants to know some specific topics for quant. So I'll just list down some of the topics. Utsav, you can write them down if it's possible. In algebra, it'll be numbers, logarithms, equations, inequalities. In fact, all of you can note them down. It's numbers, equations, logarithms, inequalities. For geometry, I would say circles, triangles, quadrilaterals. I'll repeat, geometry is circles, quadrilaterals, triangles. In modern math, you can focus on functions, sequences series, sets, and PNC. Probability isn't that important, but you can always practice it. So probability एक बर्थ के लिए छोड़ भी सकते हो, but these 4 are important. Arithmetic, the 3 basic chapters: averages, percentages, ratios. Later on, if you have time, you should practice more of time distance and time work. So I hope you get this list of topics. Abhishek says, what resources should I use to maximize my score in quant? Abhishek, whatever material you are using should be fine. It could be test funda material, it could be some other material. Typically, all of them cover the same range of topics. As long as you understand the concepts and practice more, you shouldn't have a problem. Sanket has problems in analyzing mocks. So Sanket, I just answered somebody's question earlier where I said, how should you analyze a mock? There are two aspects here. For questions where you go wrong, or you should first try and identify the section where you're weakest, followed by the question types and the chapters where you're weakest. That is one level of analysis. The second level is where you look at your mistakes and see why you have gone wrong and classify them. That for so and so type of chapters, I generally go wrong in concepts. For so and so chapters, I go wrong in calculations. For so and so chapters, I am very slow, and so on. Even for questions that you solved correctly, you should try and compare your solution with the official solution and see where you can improve. Hemant, right now, Hemant, you have said you're getting 75 to 85 marks in mocks. How do I increase my score to 140? Hemant, currently I would say don't focus too much on that. Just, I mean, your scores will improve as long as you're analyzing the questions correctly. Abhishek is saying that his accuracy rate for numerical entry jumbled paragraphs is a disaster. Abhishek, you are not alone. Even for me, it is a disaster. Lot of people find it a disaster. So I have said this earlier, I'll say it again. Jumbled paragraphs in numerical entry format is extremely difficult. So you should answer it simply because it has no negative marks. The next question is from Hima, who says RC is going to be the most difficult sex. Hima, not necessarily true. Okay, because RC might be difficult, RC might not be difficult. Since last year, we have seen that two or three of the RCs are easy and one or two are difficult. The key part is identifying which RC is easy and which is difficult. So I've tried to answer most of the questions here. Since I'm running out of time, what I will do is I will give you my email ID, and you can send me a mail with your question in that, on that ID. Okay, and I will try and answer them as soon as possible. You can write down my email ID is Gaurav, GAURAV dot Dave, DAVE, D for Delhi, A for Ahmedabad, V for Victory, E for Elephant. Gaurav.dave at testfunda.com. I will repeat my ID. It is Gaurav, GAURAV dot Dave, DAVE at testfunda.com. You can send all your doubts to this ID. Feel free to ask me questions whenever you need help for CAT. I'll try and answer them as soon as possible. In case there is a slight delay here and there, I'll still answer those questions. But just mention that you attended this webinar so that I'll have some help searching for the mails, considering the volume that I get. Guys, wish you all the very best. In case I have not been able to answer some questions, apologies for the same, but you can always get back to me at the email ID that I have given you. Thank you and wish you all the very best.